Welcome back to the Skid Factory, to episode 2 of the VL Turbo build series. Work is continuing on the VL. But first, before we kick things off, Al had a couple of words that he wanted to preach to you guys, which we've never really done before.
As you know, we've just started our very own channel, which is a pretty special thing for us, and hoping to keep us going so we can continue to bring this content to you at the same or higher quality. One thing we would love you to do is just hit that subscribe button.
Do it.
It's just a little thing, but it really helps us in the YouTube world. It's complicated, but just click it, and click the bell too. Won't hurt you.
We've never really preached this to you guys before either, though. It's nothing we've really done, so you really are doing us a huge favour. If you want to be even more of a legend, jump over to our Patreon page and donate us some money there if you like. Get your name in the credits or whatever you want to do. That helps us out a lot, and you also get to see these videos before anyone else. So help us out, give us a subscribe, hit the bell, follow us on social media for frequently updates. I'm always posting stuff on Instagram with the stories and stuff like that too. So
we're always hanging around on the Facebooks and stuff. So, and if you've got a question you want to ask about whatever, your build or whatever, just shoot it through. We normally get straight onto it, and we're happy to help anyone out as a return the favour for you watching our videos.
Unless it's a Sunday.
I'll still do it on Sunday. Anyway, hit that subscribe button and I might be able to afford to upgrade to a KTM like Woody.
Cut to the music.
Jumping straight into episode 2 of the Skid Factory VL Turbo, the engine is being removed so that it can be bolted onto an engine stand and easily worked on. We don't want the car covered in any dust or grime, so it's wrapped up in a quality car cover and guard covers laid out over the front. The bonnet is also removed and kept in a safe position on the roof of the car. It's then all systems go to remove all the standard parts and drain all the fluids. With the torque converter bolts removed, the gearbox crossmember can be unbolted, which gives us access to the upper bell housing bolts. The remaining bolts are undone and the gearbox is given a little wrestle and lowered out of the car. The engine mounts are undone, radiator and wiring loom removed, and all that's left to do is hook up the crane and lift the engine out.
was a reasonably easy job to get the old girl out. These are pretty simple compared to an RB25 or an RB26. They still got a bunch of crap under here, under the manifold, that is just needs to go in the bin. It's just old school ways of making the engine idle up and stuff when it's cold that invariably doesn't work anymore. So we'll probably bin all that when we put the new manifold on and put a throttle body that's got an idle control motor built into it that the Haltech will control properly. This technically didn't really have idle control. It just had a bunch of solenoids that would click on and off and try and make things happen, but not very well. So we're just going to get this head off and just get it down to the head shop. Single overhead cam head. Doesn't sound as good as a double overhead cam, but it's actually a very good cylinder head. They make really good power out of these heads. They're a good design, despite only being 2 valve per cylinder. It's easy to get cams and everything for them. It's obviously a lot simpler. They've just got like followers off the, like rockers off the cam onto the valves. I think the fastest single overhead cam one's it's in the 7s, maybe high 7s, so 1500 horsepower engine. Obviously they're not suffering too much with only having 2 valves per cylinder. And I think the quickest VL at the moment in Australia, at this moment, is 699, 209 mile an hour, I think it is. So yeah, they can be made into really stout engines. Not that that's what we're doing here, but they're a pretty reasonable thing. These actually suffer a little bit less from oil pump failures and that sort of thing than the double overhead cam engines do. I don't know why. It may be just because of the oil pump's doing a lot more work when it's got multiple cams, or they hold a lot of oil in the top end, something like that. But yeah, these engines are quite reliable if put together right. Make a good 10-second VL out of them, no problem at all, which is a very quick street car, and drive them around all day long. So I don't know if we're aiming for 10 seconds, but we'll try and make a nice street car for Tom to cruise around in anyway. Let's get her apart.
The RB30 is now mounted on an engine stand, which makes it a lot easier to work on. The engine can now be stripped down of all the old parts, some of which are going to be thrown in the bin, like the ignition leads, which seem to be an original part. The exhaust manifold's heat shield bolts were previously sprayed with some rust penetrant. After sitting for an hour, they can now come straight out without any snapping. Al marks the distributor after winding the motor over and lining up the timing marks. This is just to make it easier to time once the engine gets put back together in the future.
If you're not an old fella like me, you wouldn't have probably ever seen injectors like this. These are called hose tails. They're real old 80s Bosch style setup, which this engine management system is based on. They're a bit of a pain in the ass because they're very difficult to upgrade as they are. You've got to be a bit dodgy and clamp a more modern injector onto the line there. It's got this collar that holds the injector in rather than the rail holding it in. So it's not great. Fortunately, this engine's very well supported. You can just buy a whole new rail that just supports modern injectors, so you can just toss this whole thing in the bin, which is what we're going to do. A bit more old school junk that this thing has on it that we're going to throw away. This reg, that won't be capable of positive pressure control, so we'll bin that. This is a cold valve, which is old junk. It's like opens up a valve when the engine's cold and leaks air in. bin job. Also introduces a whole bunch of pipes and shit that always leak. So that goes in the bin as well. We can also, this is a valve that ups the fuel pressure when the engine's cold by switching off the vacuum to the regulator. Again, junk. They just didn't have the scope to enrich and things and to add air when the engine was cold. Very simple setups back in the 80s, but also not very effective. Adding complexity is an art form in the 80s. They loved it, and they didn't back off in the early 90s either. They went full hard. Nissan, they loved it. More pipes, more problems.
Isn't it more pipes, more glory?
Not when it's a Nissan. It's more pipes, more water leaks, and engines melted to the ground. 300 ZX.
Although the car has only travelled 41,000 kilometres, it seems that the engine must have sat with old oil for quite some time. Al is having to remove a thick sludge from each head bolt before they can be undone.
Everything looks pretty good. There's a little bit of oil sludge in the top end, probably because it's barely ever been used. We did a massive service on it when Tom first bought it about 3 or 4 years ago, just because everything was just old and corroded and the water pump was leaking from it sitting around for years and years. But otherwise everything looks good. Little Easter egg here, 4-valve piston cutouts in the 2-valve head. It's a bit odd, but it was the fashion of the time apparently. We're going to get that head off to the cylinder head shop, get them to do a service on it, clean it all up, clean all that oil sludge and crap out of it. Valve lap, I'll give them the cam that we've got. We've got a reground cam that Tom supplied. We'll throw that in, probably put some new lifters in it. They're prone to tapping away at times. They're not very expensive now, so I'll get the head shop to do all that. Then we'll get it back and refit it with a steel head gasket and some studs. Might pull the sump off, make sure it hasn't got any sludge in it, just in case. Interestingly enough, this is one of the very, very few Nissan engines that has the oil drain, the feed and the water stuff tapped into the block. Most of them just have the casting boss there and nothing in them, which makes it very difficult to do. You've got to usually put it into the sump, but we got lucky. But I'll pull the sump off anyway just to make sure there's nothing lurking around the pickup. RBs aren't great for oil problems. They do suffer when they get revved and abused a bit. So we'll give it the best chance and make sure everything's fine down there. That's it for this episode. It's getting pretty sweaty here. I can see a bit of sweat dripping into Rodrigos's eyeballs over there. It's not the usual salty liquid he gets in it, but might be time for a lemon squash, I think. So thanks for watching. We will see you next week.
Where'd you pull that one from?
What? It's from going to the beach. You're a surfer, bro. You gotta get your mind out of the gutter. All right, hot dog, I'm going to take this radiator out. Get your camera ready.
I'm going to take this radiator out.
Yes.
One and only
Great job.
chance.
Thank you.
All right, hot dog.